Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's webinar, Experiencing Light. My name is Roberta Watson, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you to tonight. We're excited to have you. Tonight, we are joined by Professor Lyn Godley from Jefferson's College of Design, Engineering, and Commerce, and she'll be providing us an insider's look into the field of lighting design and the intersection of health and design. After her presentation, we'll get a chance to hear about some really great lighting exhibits here in the Philadelphia region. But if you have any ideas or suggestions for lighting displays in your area, please feel free to submit those in the chat so we can check those out too. Now, before we have Professor Godley get us started, we are going to be submitting questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So as you think of questions, please feel free to add those to the Q&A, and we'll get to those right after the presentation. So with that, I am going to pass it over to Professor Godley. Go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Roberta, and thank you so much for inviting me to present for the Jefferson Alumni Talk. It is a pleasure. I'm going to be talking about light tonight, and I'll be talking about my journey with light-based art, the science of light's effect on our bodies and minds, and how that science has impacted my own work with dynamic and interactive light-based art. I'm going to be discussing some new ways to think about how we use light, and I'm going to wrap it up with some recommendations for some great light shows in the Philadelphia area. So again, just like Roberta said, if you guys know of any, you want to add to that, by all means, let's go ahead and do that. Disclaimer, I did not start out interested in research. I started out in fine art, but I always knew that I needed my work to go beyond self-expression. I've always been interested in how the work I do could engage or impact the user. So together with Lloyd Schwan, under the name Godley Schwan, we began a company that designed and produced tabletop accessories, furniture, lighting, and interiors, making objects that people used and interacted with. We showed our work around the world, sold to stores and private clients, and the work is now in numerous permanent museum and private collections. And somewhere along that line, I became fascinated with lighting and the effects of light. So after almost 20 years, I stepped away from creating product and decided to return to my investigation of art, along with my obsession with light and my interest in user experience. I began drawing again and feeding fiber optics through the drawings, allowing pixels of light to highlight the image. Then about 10 years ago, during a solo exhibit in Germany, where we had filled the gallery with images of birds in flight edged with pixels of light, something unexpected happened. I got a call from the curator who said that the audience was behaving strangely. They were coming into the gallery, sitting down on the floor and not speaking to one another, just looking at the work for up to 3 hours and returning multiple times. She would try to talk with them about the artist. They didn't care. They just wanted to be in the space with the artwork. This is not the norm. And that moment had a profound effect on the direction of my work. The part of my brain that as a designer wants to understand user experience woke up. What was happening here? Why were they behaving like this? I began to research on what the users might be experiencing and why. I began with art. The arts have been evident in healthcare settings from the early Renaissance through to the modern period, enhancing environments where patients and doctors strive toward better health. Throughout the Western world, hospitals are filled with artworks that could rival many museum collections, all in an attempt to humanize, alleviate bleakness, and leave a lasting impression on patients, staff, and visitors. For every day a patient lies in a hospital bed, it takes roughly 3 days to achieve his or her previous level of functioning. If an art installation gets a patient out of his room, or paintings take a person's mind off their pain and lower their stress levels, the art isn't just decorative anymore. It's part of the entire model of care. Studies have found that blood flow increased 10% to the joy response part of the brain when subjects saw a beautiful painting, just like what happens when you look at a loved one. Results from research studies consistently show that art has a positive effect on patients' mood, stress level, and overall experience. The findings give credence to what we've always suspected, that visual art has a strong, positive physiological effect on the brain. Yet the use of dynamic art even more deeply engages the viewer's sensory input, and light is the main medium for dynamic and interactive art. Also, the results of many studies show that simple exposure to certain types of patterns reduce people's level of stress up to 60%. That's important because stress can interfere with our ability to heal. It seems this effect occurs because of a certain physiological resonance within the eye when viewing certain patterns. Examples of these patterns from an artistic realm would be fractals, mandalas, overlapping patterns, or swirls upon swirls, such as these dynamic works by Rafiq Anadol. Called distraction therapy, the use of VR creates an immersive experience that is being used during uncomfortable procedures and for pain management. The immersive experience does not remove the pain or discomfort, but rather distracts the patient's attention from it, resulting in a 25% on average drop in the need for pain management medication. Could the content used for VR distraction therapy align more closely with studies of stress-reducing imagery? Could the spectrum of light entering the eye be measured and adapted to increase health benefits? Could other immersive environments, such as those using dynamic and interactive light, provide similar results without the use of a VR headset? Festivals and light fairs have seen the use of dynamic lighting for the creation of large-scale installations that engage visitors in immersive experiences, also serving as testing grounds for new applications of dynamic and interactive lighting. The use of dynamic lighting to attract and immerse audience members has been proven itself to be economically viable for cities worldwide. Through shared experience, these dynamic light shows also build a sense of community and thus a sense of trust. Can we use shared immersive experience to build a sense of community and trust between clinician and patient? Artists and interactive designers have been using light as a medium to create dynamic sensory experiences since the 1960s. These types of immersive experiences demand a level of commitment from the viewer, more than just passing by, whereby the viewer allows his or her senses to be engaged, thus altering their perception of the environment. In healthcare environments, where patients are often confined in a setting for extended periods of time, this type of immersive experience is not only potentially beneficial as a stress-reducing intervention, but through interactive technology may offer the patient a level of agency over their environment. In terms of the psychological impact of light, light is used as a visual trigger to focus attraction, create subjective impressions, and affect how we experience space. Luminance brightness can focus attention, whether to choreograph our movement through space or focus our attention on objects. As luminance contrast changes, our impressions of space are altered, making it feel cozy or welcoming or active and alert. According to Richard Kelly's categories for how we experience light, by mimicking how natural light affects us, we can use artificial light to calm, to focus, and to stimulate. For our purposes, we will go through a relatively simple definition of what light actually is. Light is radiant energy that is capable of exciting the retina and producing a visual sensation. Light is part of the electromagnetic radiation spectrum. The visible portion of the electromagnetic spectrum extends from about 380 nanometers to 770 nanometers. We will get to why this is important soon. Up until recently, the measurements for lighting were mostly what is known as luminosity or brightness, or color temperature, such as how warm or cool a light appears. But recently, we have expanded how we talk about light. Understanding that light is made up of different wavelengths is important in understanding the nature of light. The composition of light from lamps and from daylight can be broken down into individual wavelength components and plotted on a graph known as a spectral power distribution, or SPD. SPD graphs show the relative amounts of power at each individual wavelength in nanometers through the entire spectrum of light. Even though each of these light sources appear to produce white light to the eye, the radiometric energy from each is very different. So what that means is that there are two parallel systems for measuring light. One is how we perceive light, which is measured in photometric quantities. We can think of this as the visible effects of light. And the other is how the energy is transferred. And this is measured in radiometric quantities. We can think of this as the non-visible or physiological effects of light. So what does this mean in terms of how we see light and how light, particularly dynamic light, affects us physiologically? In terms of vision, we all know about the rods and cones in the retina. The rods are responsible for our so-called peripheral vision. They function in dim or dark situations and only translate a judgment of bright or dark to the brain. Cones are the photoreceptors that are responsible for all of our high detail and color vision functions. Cones are active in high light levels. Both of these classical photoreceptors, rods and cones, send photic information to the brain by way of another area in the retina, where the retinal ganglion cells live, which convert the light rays into electrical signals. Until recently, it was thought that rods and cones were the only photoreceptors in the mammalian retina. The discovery in 2002 of the photopigment melanopsin led to the identification of novel photoreceptors in the retina called intrinsically photoreceptive retinal ganglion cells, or more simply, IPRGCs. As stated before, the rods and cones are responsible for transmitting signals through the visual tract back to the visual cortex in the rear of the brain, where we make sense of what we see. The IPRGCs transmit signals through the retinohypothalamic tract to the suprachiasmatic nuclei, or SCN, and other brain nuclei. The SCN is the primary pacemaker for regulating circadian rhythms and affecting neuroendocrine and neurobehavioral systems. So just as there are two ways to think about how we measure light quantities, there are two general categories of effects of light on humans. Visual effects of light result from effects of visible light on vision and visual reflexes, predominantly due to signals from the rods and cones transmitted through the primary optic tract. Physiological effects of light include biological and behavioral responses. Light enters the eye and neural signals are transmitted initially through the retinohypothalamic tract and then project to numerous areas of the brain. The negative effects of static artificial light on the human body fall within three broad categories: neuroendocrine, neurobehavioral, and circadian. The majority of living species, from plants to humans, have physiology regulated by the circadian system. These effects are also divided into acute or short-term effects, as well as longer-term effects. The most important external factor for the circadian system is daylight. But what do we know about daylight? For one thing, it is not static, it is dynamic. Natural light is dynamic. It originates in the sun's interiors, where gases and chemicals combine, releasing energy in what we recognize as daylight. It is dynamic in its dance through and reflection off of other objects, changing in color, shadows, and movement, changing over the course of the day and season. It has the ability to both dazzle and calm, while also making the environment tangible. In our built environment, daylight gives form to architecture, shifting shadows over the course of the day, reacting to materials through absorption, reflection, and transmission. It moves across our interior spaces, bringing life into buildings of every scale. Homo sapiens have been entrained to the cycles of dynamic light for over 200,000 years before artificial light became the norm. Its dynamic nature signals to us that our environment is alive, breathing, growing, constantly changing, and adapting. The use of fire for light also provided dynamic lighting. It was this animated light that extended our waking hours and lit our evenings for over 1.5 million years. The light that our bodies have been entrained to which our bodies have set circadian, neurobehavioral, and neuroendocrine rhythms, has never been static until about 180 years ago when electric lighting became our standard. We have moved from our bodies being regulated by the dynamic light of the sun to being regulated in constant static artificial light. So what do we do? So the goal for lighting designers is to mimic daylight with artificial light, both in brightness and wavelength, and for different times of day. This metric is what is known as a melanopic daylight equivalency illumination, or melanopic EDI. In order for our physiological systems to function properly, we need to come as close as possible to natural light spectral power distributions. If we take a look at the difference between a spectral power distribution chart in the morning versus evening, you can see that in the morning we're peaking out in the cooler range around 460 nanometers. This triggers your body to start producing cortisol. It's so that you wake up. Later in the afternoon and early evening, natural light peaks out in a warmer range, around 650 to 700 nanometers. This triggers your body to start producing melatonin, which will help you sleep. If we take a look at the difference between daylight, whether it's morning or evening, with other light sources such as incandescent or fluorescent, halogen, cool LED, or warm LED, we can start to see the difference in the wavelength that is triggering our body's physiological reactions to light. But the question we have been asking of the scientific community has been, what exactly are the quantities we should be striving for? In 2019, experts in lighting, neurophysiological photometry, and sleep and circadian research got together to define just that. The primary focus of the meeting was to develop expert consensus recommendations for healthy daytime and evening nighttime light environments. Throughout the daytime, the recommended minimum melanopic EDI is 250 lux. During the evening, starting at least 3 hours before bedtime, the recommended maximum melanopic EDI is 10 lux. The sleep environment should be as dark as possible. The recommended maximum ambient melanopic EDI is 1 lux. Today, clinical research has reaffirmed the benefits of daylight. For example, hospital patients recover more quickly in daylit wards and prefer being in natural light to recuperating under artificial light. This is not just about brighter illumination, but also about dynamic illumination. Installing dynamic lighting to mimic natural daylight is taking place in hospitals to improve sleep and health. Circadian lighting developed by Chromavisio changes over each 24-hour period to provide dynamic and functional illumination suited to various tasks and moods in the Abinra Hospital Psychiatric Ward. Research supported by the National Space Biomedical Research Institute, a division of NASA, and Jefferson's Light Research Program studied the physiological effects of lighting design on astronauts. Astronauts who see the sun rise and set 16 times every day struggle with a balanced circadian rhythm. Through a 6-year study, they were able to develop lighting that is now being installed in the space station that will help to reset the astronaut's circadian rhythm. The lighting in a hospital intensive care unit has been retrofitted at the Jefferson Hospital for Neuroscience. The smart lighting system from Tellumen is potentially capable of adjusting spectrum and intensity in real time based on biometric feedback and human rest activity cycles. There is abundant research linking our circadian entrainment to the 24-hour cycle of natural light. Might dynamic lighting also affect our infradian or ultradian rhythms, those greater or less than 24 hours? Just as our bodies are a symphony of rhythms between the many systems of our physiology, how might both the photometric and radiometric symphony of dynamic light be linked to us? How might we design across the different disciplines to create dynamic environments that offer a more optimal healthcare experience, one that our bodies recognize as natural? Might the many patterns and rhythms within our brains be connected to the many patterns and rhythms of dynamic lighting in the external world? And then we went back to my work and we took a look at the light that we were using in these fiber optic pieces to try to figure out what it was about the light in these pieces that could be affecting the user. And it turned out that although the LEDs that we were using to feed light through the fiber optics, which we had chosen simply because they were the brightest we could find, actually were the same wavelength as what is used in light therapy. What did the wavelength have to do with the effect on the user, if any? And how might we use that to intentionally create a calming effect? So in terms of my work, based on this research, for the last 10 years, I have focused on creating work that could engage the viewer in a way that would calm them or promote self-reflection. The work uses light and programming to create animated imagery that is on a continuous loop where the end is imperceptible. Then about a year ago, Dr. Bruce Meyer, the president of Jefferson Health, showed up at my studio with an offer for me to submit proposals for some commissions for the new Jefferson Outpatient Cancer Center in Center City, Philadelphia. Instead, I suggested we use this as an opportunity to begin research into the physiological and psychological effects of dynamic and interactive art through the use of light. Now, a year later, we're about to launch the Jefferson Center of Immersive Arts for Health, located within the Canbar College of Design, Engineering, and Commerce at Thomas Jefferson University, which will serve as a platform for collaborative teaching, research, and prototyping, where dynamic and interactive design technologies fuse with patient experience. The center is a multi-tiered, cross-disciplinary approach dedicated to studying the impact of dynamic and interactive art and design on healing and neurodiversity. This project is the result of a growing collaborative effort across 14 different academic, research, and clinical departments. The mission of Jefferson Center of Immersive Arts for Health is to research, test, and integrate dynamic and interactive art as an active component of an improved healing experience. We are now prototyping art at Lyn Godley Design Studio, together with Tom Igo from NYU's Interactive Telecommunications Program, for testing at various locations at Jefferson Health. A variety of interactive interventions will be explored for initial testing, using light as imagery to offer a respite for a period of time to slow someone down, to engage and reflect, to investigate interactivity as a way to allow the viewer to co-create or offer a sense of agency over their environment. Creating work that requires attention and focus without a set narrative in which someone might lose themselves. The idea of immersive experience is not new. There are spaces and exhibits popping up around the world where visitors are paying for an art experience versus simple observational reaction at a gallery or museum. The difference is in the intention of using that experience for a beneficial health outcome. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks, everybody, and sorry about the mix-up there at the beginning where we lost some sound. So I think we're going to talk a little bit about, unless we had questions you don't want to get to right off the bat. Okay. We can talk about. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Go into this. Okay. Let me see. I'll go into share screen. Okay. So in terms of immersive light experiences, or just really good light experiences, and holidays are always a great time for this, but a few of these are on year-round. If you have not been to the James Turrell Sky Space at Chestnut Hill Friends Meeting House, Definitely go. It is just absolutely mesmerizing. It takes about an hour. And you do have to make arrangements ahead of time. You used to be able to just pop in, but not anymore. So just type in James Terrell, Chestnut Hill, and it'll come up. But it's a really amazing space. This area up here actually opens up to the sky at night. And the change of color throughout the ceiling actually gives the appearance that the sky is changing color too. It's absolutely beautiful. Clip Collective, if you don't know, is a company here in Philadelphia, one of the larger companies doing digital projection mapping. And every year they do projection mapping across City Hall. That just opened up this week, I guess, on the 16th, and that runs through January. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of other lights going on down at City Hall as well. Boathouse Road does their Festival of Lights November 28th through January 1st, where they have a bit more of a light show than ordinary. And I don't know if anybody here has been to the Van Gogh Immersive experience yet. It's down at the Tower Theater. It's on I think until maybe the end of February or not. You have to get tickets ahead of time. But it's a totally immersive experience where they just fill the room with digital projection mapping of Van Gogh's work, or something similar to Van Gogh's work, because obviously he didn't do the digital mapping. Leo Villarreal is a really well-known lighting designer. He's doing all of the lighting for the bridges in London. He did the Bay Bridge out in San Francisco. And this is his first piece in Center City. It's a program to continue to go through a lot of different algorithms, which is really beautiful. And that's over on Market. If you just like holiday lights, there is nothing that beats 13th Street down around 1600 South 13th Street. I don't know if anyone lives in that neighborhood from here. I used to have a friend who lived there, but it is crazy. They shut down about 4 blocks simply because there are so many lights and so many people come to see it. There's a show, the Parade of Lights, which is a river light show down at the Independent Seaport Museum on December 4th. And there's always, Longwood Gardens does a big Christmas celebration with lighting as well as the fountains. These two come a little bit later. The Philadelphia Chinese Lantern Festival is always fun, and that usually runs in the spring and sometimes drags through until the middle of June. But this one here, you guys should all write this down. If you haven't been to Longwood Gardens, or you didn't see when Bruce Monroe showed there before and came in and absolutely took over the entire Longwood Gardens to do lighting installations, it was absolutely breathtaking, and he's coming back this year. So tickets go on sale in March. Get tickets, because this one, if you miss everything else, definitely that one it's a must see. So that's what I have to say as far as where you guys should go see stuff. Roberta has the PDF, so if you need a copy of that, by all means, I'm sure she can get that to you. And that's that. There was a question that was raised while the video was going about what happens if you're blind. Okay. And I know that Bud Brainerd is on the call right now, and he is the lead researcher from the Light Research Program that did the project with NASA, and they're doing amazing work down there as far as the effect of light on humans. But what we're trying to impress is that there's 2 different ways to approach lighting. And one of them is all about the visible light, right? And how we process that through our optic tract, as well as psychologically and culturally and all of that. But the other track, the other sort of physiological effects of light have nothing to do with whether you can see or not. So there have been studies on animals that have absolutely no vision, and it's still having an effect. I mean, even if you have no vision, you still have a circadian rhythm. And so all of those other effects of, more of a photometric or by wavelength is still affecting somebody if they have no sight. Okay.
Thank you for answering that, Professor. That's great. And we can continue asking questions using the Q&A button. So if you think of anything, go ahead and drop those in the Q&A button. And if you have some suggestions for lighting displays in your area, please feel free to drop those in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. But to get us started with our Q&A, we had some questions come through on our registration page. So thanks for submitting those. The first kind of group of questions are more related to design and lighting design. So the first question for you, how do you feel about color in combination with lighting? Like, is it better to do warm colors, cool color? Like, what's your designer brain think that way?
Okay. Well, first off, I think it's really important. I mean, you know, we can get into the physiological effects in a moment as far as the color, but I think it's really important to understand how light works with color, and depending on what wavelength of light is coming through your light source, it can really distort the colors that are in your room. And so whenever you're looking at light, again, you know, as we move away from talking about color, temperature, or just, you know, brightness, and we start talking about the wavelength, you want something that is as close to daylight as possible, because it's an even spectrum of light across the whole range. I mean, if you come in with a fluorescent light, and I don't know if you notice those SPDs of fluorescence where it peaks at green and it peaks at red or yellow, you know, and a little blue. And it's like you put that on and all of the coloring is off. So you know, the sodium lights that they use in parking lots that are very yellow, right? If you're putting them inside, we lose all of our color and we just look gray. Okay, so color is really critical, and color sets mood, right? And so a lot of the lights that are being designed now, where you can play with, you know, changing the color, and I know the Philips Hue lamps are great fun if you're having a party, you know, so that's all important. But again, when we get to the physiological effects, you do not want heavy blue light in your bedroom at night, right? Or even in your house in the evening. Okay, and so you know, we're really looking at it. It's not. There's part of it is the visual response, and the other part is the kind of deeper response on what it is doing to us in terms of the wavelength. So color is critical and really difficult, but
color is critical. I'm going to remember that, definitely. Yeah. So our next question, what are your recommendations for lighting in maybe as like a living room in a home with limited natural light sources?
I think you have to understand what takes place in the living room, right? And so there's certain standards as far as per task, all right? So I assume that most people in the living room want to be able to watch TV, so you don't want something that is getting a whole lot of glare on your TV set, or you might want to actually have a conversation with someone, so you don't want bright light that's too harsh that it kind of washes everybody's face out, right? You also might want to read, and so you might need some task lighting. We talk about lighting in terms of space is layering the light. And so that you're not going to put one bulb on the ceiling, right? You're going to have a lot of different light sources that can blend together to create an overall effect, or individually, you know, accomplish what needs to happen for particular tasks. So, you know, my feeling is always take a look at what you're doing in the living room and what the light needs to do for you.
Definitely.
That made any sense at all?
Yes, that was good advice. Good advice. Look at the space for sure. A question that came through on the chat. How do you choose light bulbs? This guest hasn't quite figured out which ones to buy. So any advice on that?
Most light bulbs are going to have some information on the package as far as, is it a cool white? Is it a warm white? Is it does it mimic sunlight? There are some companies now that are making LEDs that they claim are very close to a sunlight SPD. More and more lighting companies are starting to put the SPD onto the packaging. So I think that you really have to take a look at, what are you using the light for? If you've got a really cool light, it might be great, to wake up to in the morning because it will make you more alert. But I certainly wouldn't want to be eating dinner under that. Okay. So, the more that you can think about the possibility of getting light that might be what we refer to as dynamic, so that it might be able to change in wavelength or color temperature or brightness, it offers you a lot more options.
Great. So the next set of questions I want to move on to are more on like lighting and health in that intersection. So first one, what do you think of light boxes, and do you think they help with seasonal affective disorder? And would you recommend any other, tools to help?
I'm sure that they help somewhat. A lot of people use them. So yes, if you're in a place like I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and so did Bud Brainerd. So he's going to agree with me, I'm sure. There's no sun there, like for 6 months, it's just gray. Okay. So if you're in a place where you can't get sunlight, yes, you may need to complement that. Okay. Especially if you suffer from seasonal affective disorder. We will usually tell people get outside, try to get outside and get into sunlight for even a half an hour a day. Go for a walk, get some sun, because it's very difficult to totally replace that, right, with artificial lighting.
Yeah, that brings up a great point for the next question. Getting outside and getting sunlight is really important. But for those of us that are in an office with fluorescent lighting, 8 to 10 hours a day, and maybe don't have a weekend option, an option, is there something that can be done, to kind of switch up the environment, or things that can help?
Most of us, I have an office at Jefferson, and it used to have this huge window that was wonderful because it looked out, and there was a great one of those maple trees that turns brilliant orange. And the Ronson building that they put up on Henry Avenue, they attached it right at my office. So my window now looks into a student lounge, right? And so there's absolutely no light at all in there. And I'm sorry, maybe because, I'm older and sorry, I don't think they're going to fire me at this point. I don't stay in my office anymore. I come back to my studio where I have more natural light, and do a lot of work from here. I would suggest, since you're probably not going to get the company, unless you work for a really great company, to change out all your lighting, bring in another light source. Because fluorescent lighting is really difficult to be under all day long, right? And so bring in a table lamp, where you have some option as far as what the light source is within that table lamp.
Great advice. I think I'm going to take that as well. Different light source. All right. Our next question. Do you consider principles of universal design in lighting to accommodate with low vision? Came through registration. I feel like you talked about this a little bit with low vision or being blind, but anything else you'd like to add to that?
Well, we're talking about two different things. Okay, so if we're talking about having enough lighting so that someone who has low vision can see what they need to do, yes, absolutely, we need to raise the amount of lighting. I'm getting older, and I need a lot more light to see what I have to do. Okay, as everybody does as we age, because our lenses on our eye gets darker. But there are standards for that, both by the IES and the CIE, which are our lighting standards, both here and in the EU. The standards tend to go one set of standards for most people, and then another set of standards for people. Is it over 55 or something? I forget. But for the elderly, because there's a lot of damage that is done to the eye just through aging. That means that we need a lot more in order to see what we're doing, and not only a lot more light, but a lot less contrast, because it's harder for us as far as spatial recognition. So yes, I don't know if I would call it universal design, but there are standards in terms of how to adapt for that, and I'm sure that somewhere within ADA there's something in there in terms of lighting.
Wonderful, thank you. Mm-hmm. Question, do you find a difference in well-being between a 5,000 and 4,000 daylight bulbs?
Well, 4,000 and 5,000 daylight bulbs, we're talking about color temperature. again, which is a different measurement than an SPD, or it's a different measurement than melanopic EDI. Okay. And the difference there really is that the attention to the wavelength and not the color. So whenever we're talking about, the Kelvin temperature, it's how warm or how cool it is, right? And so you can have something that looks very similar on a Kelvin temperature, but the SPD is very different. Okay. So in terms of how, just on a visual level, I think it's, that's really up to you. I'm a little older. I did not grow up with LEDs. I grew up with incandescents. I love that warm light that comes from something that resembles an incandescent. I feel very, very blue lights, even aside from the fact that, it's messing with my circadian. It doesn't feel like a place I want to live. Right. And so I think that a lot of that is, your preference also.
Right.
Again, coming back to, if you can get yourself some bulbs that you can actually, that are tunable, both in color and brightness, that would help.
I love the warm light as well. It makes it and cozy. Definitely. Speaking of LED light bulbs, what are the problems with new bright LED light bulbs, when the neighbors might have, a motion light or something that comes into your space and is, light trespassing?
Yeah, it's a big problem. I mean, especially with exterior lighting, and I do some exterior lighting, so I'm guilty of this. It's a huge problem especially when we get into urban areas, because every time someone lights up the facade of their building, it means that the guy next to him has to also, right? Or they just go silent. It's like, so I do think that hopefully there'll be some more zoning laws that they start to enforce as far as this, because otherwise it's going to be, we're dealing with way too much light pollution, and it can be really disturbing if you have to live around that.
Definitely. All right. Next question. Can light technology be used to help with sundowning and dementia and potentially some other sleep cycle disturbances?
I have read that they're doing studies on this, but Brainerd could probably answer more on exactly what those studies are showing. But yes, from what I've been reading, and Bud, you can unmute yourself and jump in at any moment. From what I've been reading, it's, there's an enormous amount that they're looking at in terms of the effects of light, and how might we, kind of help reset things for sleep disturbances, eating, gene protection, a lot. It's big. It's really big, and it's a really new field. It's 2002 when they discovered the iPRGC cell. So it's a really short amount of time that everything that we thought we knew about lighting has kind of been turned upside down in terms of this whole other area of effect on us.
Right. That's great. And it looks like George Brainerd's submitting some really great content in the Q&A button. So I'll be sure to send some of these links out in our follow-up.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much. So another question, let's see, we will go to this one. Anything else we can do to protect our eyes as we age in terms of damaging lights, light waves, or just besides dimming lights?
Well, one thing that I've done a little bit of reading about is, when we get LED lights, and especially when they put LED lights into most settings, LED lights dim naturally over a period of time. So they will always install LEDs that are much brighter than what you need, right? With the idea that keep them turned down low, and then over however many years, you can turn them up as they start to naturally dim on their own. People don't turn them down low. They turn them up as full. It's so that actually, is doing some damage to the retina. So you just have to be really careful. Don't stare at LEDs, but who stares at the center of a light source anyhow, right? So yes, be careful of the same as be careful of your ears, it's like get those earbuds out of there blasting away. Okay, I wanted to check on Becky Flax's, number one, because I know and love Becky, where she asks about how do reflective transmitted light as opposed to emitted light impact the effect on our bodies and physical reactions. In typical lighting design, usually what we're measuring is light that bounces off of a surface to us, okay? So when you're measuring light, you measure it, the light coming off of a wall or coming off of a table. And so, that's one way of measuring it. When we're measuring for melanopic EDI, you're taking the light meter and measuring what's coming directly at your face. So it's not so much exactly what it's coming off of, it's what's entering your eye directly at kind of eye height. Okay. Did that answer that, Becky? Enough? Okay.
Hopefully we should be good. Okay, next question. Or if you can comment anything on this, please comment on relationship of flashing variable colored lights and epilepsy.
There are certain patterns of flashing that you really have to stay away from, and anyone who's working with lighting should know what those are, right? There are also patterns of flashing lights that they're looking at to actually synchronize certain rhythms in the body or of the brain. But without question, you have to be very careful. That there was an event, I think it was in Japan, probably about 7 years ago or so. And they had all these young kids come in, and not only were they flashing the lights in a way that could have put people into seizures, but they were using UV lights because they liked how it looked. And they ended up like frying a lot of the audience's retinas, So yes, lighting is really great and really exciting, but you really should, be careful how you're using it. And flashing lights, it's the same as, when we talked a little bit ago for people who are doing this and it's going into the neighbor's window, you really have to be careful as far as what you're doing and you're not emitting that outside of your area.
A question from Robert Miller. Do you have a good source or website that produces and sells directional covers for outside lights? We see with people putting up big light on 45-degree angles. As you drive or walk by them, they tend to blind you.
Yeah, anybody who's actually purchasing lighting, you should be able to get that through a lighting distributor, okay? Because they're parts are, that should be as an option on the lighting that is purchased. I would think that you might have a hard time putting binders on someone else's installation, but I think that you should be able to get them to maybe do that. I know where I live, they put up some bollards, which are, those post lamps, right, in order to light the area, the neighborhood, so it's safer. And the glare is so bad that there could be criminals all around. You wouldn't see them because the glare is so bright you can't see anything else. And we actually took some silver duct tape and went out and covered it, and the amount of light that's coming through the duct tape is enough for you to see the area, but it's not blinding anymore. So far they haven't taken the duct tape off, but I wouldn't suggest doing that to your neighbor's lamps.
There you go. Thank you for answering that. So this leads us to our last question. So thank you for everybody for submitting your questions using the Q&A button. Last one, we have a viewer in the Atlanta area and was wondering if you have any suggestions for visits or lighting displays there.
Not at all. I haven't been to Atlanta in ages, but I mean, if you just type in good lighting exhibits or good immersive, most immersive experiences are based on light, whether it's digital projection or some sort of light show. It's almost all light based. Typically they're writing about this so much, and there's so many light festivals that are going on because they've proven economically very viable for cities that you should be able to find plenty, especially this time of year.
Great.
But if I hear of anything, I'll let Roberta know.
Yes, please do. And I'll pass it along. And I think that's great advice for all of us to make sure to look up different immersive experiences in our area, because there's so many things around the country, right? So yeah, absolutely.
But for all of you here, definitely go see the James Turrell Sky Space. If not this winter, because they do shut it down at some point because they have to open the ceiling, right? Then go in the spring. It is absolutely breathtaking, as is the Bruce Monroe piece out at Longwood Gardens. It'll be here in the spring.
So exciting. I can't wait. It's going to be great. So thank you, Professor Godley, for putting together this presentation and for sharing all of your advice. And thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. Before we tune off and say goodbye, I wanted to just share some important announcements of some upcoming things. So let me throw this up on the screen. If you haven't already, we have a Jefferson Alumni Network that you can add a profile, look up other alumni, find people in your industry. So definitely profile, you can use the QR code on the screen, or you can visit alumninetwork.jefferson.edu. We also have a number of really great events coming up, including a tour of Longwood Gardens and a lunch that goes with it. So if you want to go over and see some of the holiday displays there, then I hope you'll join us on Saturday, December 11th. And you can find information for all of our upcoming events at jefferson.edu/alumni events. So with those quick updates, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. We know the holidays are coming up, so I want to wish you all a wonderful holiday season with your families, and I hope to see you all very soon. So thanks so much for joining us. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.